Mobley. On Conversations with Tony Mobley today, I am having an educational panel, and this is part two of our conversation. This is episode 3 of 2025 of Conversation with Tony Mobley. And yes, we're back, and we are powered by Mimo Live. I want to thank everyone, the team behind Conversations with Tony Mobley, for all of your hard work. You can go to conversationwithtonymobley.com and you can see this conversation and other conversations. We also have an interactive chat. It's called Mukana, courtesy of Alex Lindsay and 090. Mukana gives you the opportunity to put in your questions. Not only can you put in those questions can be voted up and down. And so we ask that you go to Conversation with Tony Mobley and watch this conversation, or you can join us on YouTube and you can ask your questions in the YouTube chat. And now we're going to get started. And my guests today are Dr. Chris Clark, Rabbi David Paskin, and Mr. John Snyder. And we want to know, gentlemen, first let me just say thank you so much for being here with me. And I'm laughing because we've already really started to have some dialogue and conversation in the pre-show. And so we were going to share a lot of what we talked about in the pre-show right now. So again, we want to say welcome, Dr. Clark, welcome, Rabbi David Paskin, and Mr. John Snyder. Thank you all so much for being here with me today. We're going to start with Mr. John Snyder.
Hey, Tony. What do you want me to start with?
We just want you to say hello.
Oh, hi, everybody. I am the Mister of this group.
Okay. And we're going to go to David Paskin, my friend.
Hello,
who asked
hello.
me not to call him Rabbi. So we're not going to call him Rabbi. We're going to say
Well, just because
David
we're
Paskin.
amongst friends. We're amongst friends. What's to be so formal? Yeah.
Okay. So thank you, David, for being with me today.
Thank you for the
And
invitation.
the elder statement, the conversation with Tony Mobley, advocate, Dr. Chris Clark. We'd like you to say hello as well.
Hello, and I'm thrilled to be here. Tony used to call me the ringer because
That's
when
right.
I watched a show and would throw in some questions from afar, he apparently felt that was a lifeline that kept the conversation going. So I'm proud to play that role as the guy
Absolutely.
that asks the question that keeps the conversation rolling.
And you still are the ringer. It's not past tense. You still are. So thank you
Not
so
done yet,
much.
yeah.
So we're going to get into the questions. So the first question is, how has your family contributed to your education and who you are now? And we're going to start with David.
Wow. So my didn't come from the best family. But my father was an educator. He was a math, economics, science teacher, very much into STEM, but also a philosopher. And he did not make school easy for me. But I guess I should be grateful for that because he really pushed me. You know, he really challenged me to work hard. Not that I always did, but he certainly challenged me to work hard. I would say that perhaps now my mom is a tremendous influence on me. And that's because she is living now in California, and she takes every class that she possibly can on Zoom. She is constantly studying and learning, and she has been for years, but since the pandemic, it really picked up. So every time I'm teaching, she comes to my classes, she takes classes on her own. And that to me is that's just sort of a dream, right? To be in a place where you don't need to learn. You know, it's not for work. It's not for. It's just because it's because that's what we're supposed to do here is learn and grow. So
Amazing. Thank you so much for that. Uh, uh, Mr. John Snyder.
Yeah, it reminds me of one of my favorite jokes. A rabbi, a minister, a doctor, and a regular guy go on a Zoom meeting and start talking about their families of origin. Um, no, but seriously, I've always been an incredibly curious person. And I think my parents have always appreciated that, and they never scolded me for it. Like my sister used to make fun of me and count the number of questions I would ask in a day when I was a smaller child. And we grew up on a farm, and on the farm, you either kept yourself busy or someone kept you busy. And so I think I was naturally given the opportunity to explore a lot of information on my own. And my parents just encouraged me to cultivate my curiosity, which has really led me on a very meandering path throughout my life and got me to where I am today.
Thank you. Dr. Clark?
Well, I grew up in the city of Philadelphia, city boy. In fact, when I got to college was the first time I realized that all of my classmates thought that I had grown up in the most dangerous and terrifying neighborhood they could imagine. They were from other parts of the Philadelphia area, but they would never go to Port Richmond, where I grew up, because it was too dangerous. Of course, when we grew up there, that was home, that was the neighborhood. It didn't feel dangerous to us living there, but apparently from a distance, it was shocking to them that somebody like I was at that time could emerge from that kind of what they imagined was that kind of background. I found school easy. Um, I was the youngest in my class all the way through school because I started kindergarten at 4 years old. And I didn't skip any grades, but I was always the youngest and usually the smallest person in my class. So part of my success was being funny, trying to be an entertainer, and especially developing a friendship with some of the biggest boys in the class. Um, so it was learning about how to make your way in a socially complicated setting where I was the smart kid, but I was also played an entertainer role, not in a way that competed with the teacher, but um, kept gave me a niche to be and to be the good student who sat up front and did show what was possible um, in terms of learning. Um, my mother was a big influence on me and is still. Um, she was not college educated, but she could have been. She was very smart and very interested in history, in the history of the city of Philadelphia and of our part of the city, our neighborhoods, and so forth. Um, and she was a kind of an intellectual leader in the neighborhood and social leader in the sense that she volunteered to be a census taker. So she would go to hundreds of homes and every 10 years and interview families to find out how many people lived there and when they were born and so forth. So she was a voluntary part of the community and connected with everybody in the community. Um, and being and my being successful in school was I was the oldest of five kids born within 6.5 years. So all the teachers in schools knew the Clark kids. And I was the first one that made an impression on the teachers. And then my sister, a year younger than me, came along, and some of the expectations that I had set got laid upon her that, for better and for worse. and so on down the line, um, to my brother and my other two sisters. So my mother was a big influence, but so was my father. He was a pharmacist, and for much of my schooling years, we lived above the pharmacy, Clark's Pharmacy in Port Richmond in Philadelphia. So I got to see the world of work. Now, usually, children only see a professional who is a teacher. They don't see other professions up close and personal. But I had the blessing of being able to see what an independent pharmacist life is like, and how he managed the business and became a part, again, a part of a contributing part of the community. We lived in a neighborhood of immigrants, and so mostly from Poland and Ukraine. And the pharmacy was essentially a community center, certainly for health, but also for telephone. Not everybody had a telephone in their home in my neighborhood at that time. But the pharmacy had two telephone booths, payphones, and people would call from Poland, from Warsaw, and say, "Could you run get Mrs. Zuvich, who lives down the street?" And one of us kids would be sent down to Mrs. Zuvich's house to call her to the telephone, up in the phone booth in Clark's Pharmacy. So
Mm.
the whole system was a wonderful. Now probably doesn't exist. The opportunities I had didn't exist in the way that they do now. And so basically that was it. I was the shining star, the kid who was in the honors classes eventually and got the college scholarship. I wouldn't have gone to scholarship. I wouldn't have gone to college. They couldn't afford to send me to college unless I had a scholarship, and I did win a Navy ROTC scholarship. So that's how I became a naval officer after college. But that's another story.
Thank you, Thank you, Dr. Clark. And I just want to say to our audience, those who are listening, please ask your questions. We have a really great panel tonight, and ask your questions either in the YouTube chat or Mukana. Our next question is, well, before I go to our next question, I want to just go back to Dr. Clark for a quick second. I just had a thought, I grew up in a city that was infamous, and it did not, like you, Dr. Clark, it did not register to me that it was as infamous as other people were led to believe. And I guess to a certain extent, I grew up in Newark, New Jersey, that the environment, when you're in it, it does not, you're not afraid of the community in which you live because you're a part of that community. And there are things that you recognize in terms of interacting with people that allow you to move through that environment without it holding you back. And so I just wanted to share that I understand what you were saying when other people had certain expectations based on where you come from. Our next question is, please talk about your thoughts about project-based learning. And we're going to start with John.
Yeah, my current role is primarily one of corporate education. And in corporate education, it's sort of all project-based learning because you learn on the job. And the majority of what you learn and retain and apply, I think there's a difference between learning information and learning to apply information or synthesize information. And we can get into, the technical terms of all that if we wanted to, but Um, on the job, you have something you need to do. And so you go learn how to do it. And so oftentimes we naturally frame our project-based learning on the job in ways that are, or we frame our learning on the job in project-based ways. So you have a goal, an outcome, and you find a way to get to that goal. And one of the problems with that type of learning is if you focus just on the outcome without the learning process, the learning might not stick. And we can oftentimes focus on the outcome instead of the process of learning. And it's a question of, did you in fact learn? Then on the other hand, when you go to formal learning or education or schools, oftentimes it's the opposite problem, where we focus so much on the piping information from the outside world into a human brain that we neglect why does this matter and how can we make sure that our students can use this information in the future. And so I think there's definitely a mix. I don't know if I'd even go so far as to say balance, but there's a mix of how do we take information and build the information in a conceptual level, as well as make that information practical. And I think designing learning experiences that start with what are we trying to achieve, and then work backwards to what do they need to learn to be able to achieve this in a project context can be a super effective way to educate people in a meaningful way that they can use in their lives. But I think more often educators are focused on how do I check a checkbox of some sort, whether it's checking the project-based checkbox or checking the grade checkbox or checking the person can do this job checkbox. But we need to, learning is both being able to do something and building your own cognitive schemas, or you can think of it as shelves in your brain, getting those connections between the different shelves so that when you're in a similar situation in real life, you can pull the right book off the right shelf and do something with it. And project-based learning can be a really effective way to do that when done well.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much for that. David?
Well, I would like to start just by saying I'm a huge John Snyder fan. I'm kind of a groupie of all of the education shows that you did a few years ago. I mean, I'm a big fan. Tony, I brought a prop. Is it okay if I share my prop? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
So, and if it's okay, I'd like to say two things. So the first thing is, I imagine education like climbing a mountain. Not that I've ever actually climbed a mountain, but here's and there are 4 stages to this. So the first stage is base camp. That's down here. Base camp is where you get all the skills and all the stuff that you need. You pack your backpack, you get all the supplies that you need for the climb. Then the next stage is practice. Like, think about like the bunny hill when you're skiing, right? It's safe, the teacher's right there next to you, but you get some good practice in. Traditional schools, as I see it, live in this space, in these 2 areas. I would argue that they spend too much time over base camp packing content rather than skills. But generally speaking, they're in this space. But here's the problem. The problem is they never climb the damn mountain. Excuse me. The kids never climb the mountain. They never actually use what they've learned. And so it seems to me that this is where project-based learning sort of lives, although I'm going to give it a different name in a moment. It lives in the expedition. It lives in actually taking, as John said, these skills and this content and then putting it to work. And I think that equally important to the climb is what happens after the climb. And that is, okay, what worked? What didn't work? Not what did I learn? How did I learn? Right? How did this process work for me? And what can I do differently next time to make my learning even richer? And the last thing that I'll say, and then I promise I'll be quiet, is that I thought a lot about project-based learning versus problem-based learning. And I really like problem-based learning, I think, better, because it addresses not just a hypothetical project, but a real problem. But then someone said to me, a coach that I work with said to me a couple of weeks ago, the word problem connotes something is wrong. There's nothing necessarily wrong when there's a problem. So we changed to challenge-based learning, CBL, that we want our children to take what they learn and put it into real practice in real life challenging scenarios. And then I think it was Dr. Clark who was talking about, or forgive me, maybe it was John, talking about the teacher rather than another expert. Our teachers, in my dream sort of thing, they're not the ones doing the assessments. If the kids did a project that involved building a circuit, an electrician comes in and works with the children on assessing their work. So I'll stop talking now. But for me, it's challenge-based learning, and it's focusing on climbing the actual mountain.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Dr. Clark?
Well, I will preface my remarks by saying I'm a big David fan and a big John fan and a big Tony fan who brought us all together, each for different reasons. Your gifts are wonderful and different, complementary. As to project-based or problem-based learning, I'm a huge fan. And some of that came from our couple of years of Saturday morning office hours, education hour experiences, mostly during the pandemic when many schools were closed. And it seemed to me over that 18 months or whatever the length was that we met, that the group of thoughtful, experienced people in education, that included John and maybe David was a guest at some of the time, but we came to a consensus that whatever you label it, whether it's problem-based or project-based learning, that was our favorite mode. That made a lot of sense to these experts who were ranged from elementary teachers to teachers in higher education and everything in between. My most powerful experience with project-based learning started at the top of the mountain, to use David's metaphor, which was designing and leading a doctoral program, designing it for the first time and taking the first cohort of doctoral students through it. And of course, the PhD is thought of as the pinnacle of education, but it has problems too. It's actually the same problem that David pointed out with earlier levels of education, which is we professors like to say, well, there's theory and there's practice. And then we talk for 8 years about theory and say, well, we've run out of time, but I hope you're successful in applying this to your practice. Congratulations. And then our graduates go on to become professors and repeat the same process with the next generation. So fortunately for me, I was given an opportunity at Arizona State University to create a different kind of doctoral program. And what we did was, instead of the typical pattern of coursework for several years, followed by a new phase, which is a dissertation, which the students had never done a dissertation. They had never done a research study that was original and drew on the literature that preceded us, the research that preceded us. So many doctoral students stumble when all the rules change. They're wonderful students. They get great grades. They're really good at learning the theory and showing that you've learned it, that you remember it at least long enough to pass your comprehensive exams. But they're not experienced doers of research in this case. So what we did instead was we said to the first cohort in their first semester, you're going to do a study in your workplace. These were experienced educators who are coming back for a graduate degree, that you're working full time. We're going to have you do an action research study in your site of practice, your school, where you're actually trying to improve your own practice. You're going to study some facet, you're going to change some facet of your own practice and collect data that will show you whether the differences, the changes you made, make a difference. And it's going to be awful. Your first study is going to be terrible. It's going to make all the rookie mistakes that are possible to make. We're also going to require you to write it up, and we're going to require you to publicly present it in December at the end of the first semester to not only to your classmates and to faculty, but to people you invite from your workplace to come and see you present your awful first study. And then in the second semester, you're going to do another study, a slightly less awful study. And you're going to incorporate the lessons you learned doing the first study into the way that you frame the second study. And in the meantime, we're going to be having class meetings every week, and you're going to be reading about methodology for collecting data that's reliable and valid, and you're going to be reading about what other people have done, more experienced researchers have done in the same area, the good questions that they've asked and the ways in which they've answered them. And so your second study will be better than your first study. And then, believe it or not, in your third semester, you're going to do another study, and it's going to be even less awful. And then finally, your fourth study is going to be your dissertation, and it's going to profit from all the things you've learned in our classes with regard to methodology and question asking and persuasive writing about what you learned and who went before you, whose work you drew upon, crediting them. And it won't be a cliff that you fall off at the end of your course taking, where you're asked to do something completely different than be a student in class. It's going to be the top of the mountain. It's going to be something you're proud of, and the people you've been inviting to come and hear you present these at the end of each semester, those people are going to be impressed at how far you've come. And of course, it also solved another persisting problem of practice in graduate education, which is that a lot of people never finish. It's called the all but dissertation degree, ABD, which is tragic because we set them up to not succeed. So I think this applies to secondary school, it applies to elementary school, it applies to kindergarten, it applies to the classic apprenticeship model of learning a trade or a profession where you work closely with a master or a journeyman, and you, the novice, become gradually better and better at by modeling and by being coached at this profession. You become more confident and competent. So I'm a big fan of it. I think no matter how education changes through technology, for example, the idea of doing something that's definitely memorable, that may feel like it's too hard at the beginning, and it is too hard to do it perfectly. I think, unfortunately, we've raised many generations of good students who don't want to do anything until it's perfect. I want to do it perfectly the first time. And that's not healthy. And it's really not possible to do something very complex and worthwhile the first time out. So let's have a soft landing for the first and second and third um, shot at doing a project or a program or solving a problem, um, so that by the time you're doing it for all the marbles, you have valid experience, confidence, and you have the support of your community. So there are 20 other students in this doctoral cohort who are also showing off telling their stories and their small victory stories and their poignant mistakes, bonehead mistake stories, that all of us are learning from, and so we're learning from one another's parallel experience. So that's my long pitch on starting at the top of the mountain, but holding on tight, being roped in, so that you don't crash and burn, but you certainly remember that first awful study.
Can I offer
Absolutely.
another observation as well, Tony? It's easy for us all, no matter what industry we're in or whatever our expertise is in, to see when everyone else misses our nuance, and then we look at everyone else with no nuance at all, right? And it's easy anytime that the tool becomes the end instead of the means to the end. I think we're doing ourselves a disservice. So there are times where project-based learning is not the best, and we've one area as an example I can think of is most of us can say what 6 times 4 is immediately, and we didn't learn that by doing a project. We learned that through just sheer repetition and beating our heads over and over again. And that's one of the most used skills from school that we've used in our day to day is simple arithmetic. So there are occasions where the best tool isn't project-based learning, even though it might oftentimes be the best overall integration type tool when we learn. And I just think we
John,
should always
can I ask you a
consider
question?
our nuance is different than someone else's.
Can
Yeah.
I challenge you on that and ask you a question?
Sure.
Tony,
Go
you
ahead.
didn't tell us we weren't supposed to interrupt, so I'm just going to go ahead and do it.
No, it's fine. It's
So,
fine.
John, is that an eternal truth that content knowledge is fundamental? Because I'm just not sure that it is.
No,
It seems
not always,
to me
no.
that it seems to me that in an age where in an instant, without thinking, I could say, "Hey Shlomo, what's 2 + 2?" and get the answer. I'm not saying there's not value in being able to do that mathematical process, but memorizing the answers, I'm just not sure that.
But
I
I
buy
would
that.
also say you haven't learned arithmetic then if you need to use Siri to be able to do it. So if we're talking about learning as an event, then
Okay.
you haven't learned. So I don't know if that's the same thing or not, but it's an
Well,
interesting
but
use case.
I'm thinking about learning arithmetic versus memorizing multiplication tables, maybe.
I don't know. But
Yeah.
I would say different topics and the person's experience helps us dictate how much do we sometimes all I'm saying is I'm arguing is that sometimes it's helpful to have scaffolding knowledge to transfer one way prior to applying it, and sometimes learning through the application process or the project is the better way to do it. And it's the educator's way of saying it depends. And it really does. And I'm almost every field has that.
Yeah.
Okay.
The
Yeah, I
answer is
just
24,
real quickly.
by the way, John. 24.
I want to say real quickly that I have had the benefit, I've shared this before, I've had the benefit of actually going to a high school that had a project-based component to it. The high school that I went to, St. Benedict's Prep, Newark, New Jersey, Father Edwin, headmaster for over 50 years, still in place. The school year is broken up into 3 parts. There are 2 parts that are traditional education modes. The third part is primarily during the summer months, about 8 weeks during the summer, where it is exclusively project based. You have to do an actual activity. It could be We produced um, theater for elementary schools. We had rotating staff. You one week you were um, background. Um, one week you were directors. One week you were actors, and it rotated. Um, there was bike hikes. I am old enough that I actually went on a bike ride touring the 1976 Centennial bike hike, and we rode to specific uh, um, sites in New Jersey and Philadelphia and Pennsylvania on bikes, and we had to write reports about what we saw and experienced on the bike hike, camping, photography, all kinds of different projects that you had. And every year you had to select a different project. You couldn't do the same project over and over again. It was stimulating. And I have pulled in my adult life, I have pulled from those experiences time and time and time again. They have, I was able to go to college um, after getting a scholarship and getting injured and going into the work world. I was able to glean from one of the projects to actually become an offset printer pressman, and was the way in which I funded my education to go to college. I went to the school and told them that I had skills. I can run your printing press. I want to go to school here. And they hired me, and I got enrolled. And it worked. And all of those things have everything that I've ever done is in part because of the experiences. Not only those experiences, but because those experiences have influenced my life. And so I'm going to stop talking now, and we're going to get to Liberty White has been for um, um, uh, taking on Dr. Clark's role of being a ringer, and she has put in multiple questions. And so we're going to get started into these questions. So we're going to have to, we're running out of time, so we're going to have to be real succinct with our answers to these questions. We focus on education and training to help teams implement AI effectively. What strategies have you found most effective for adult learners in this space? And we're going to start with Dr. Clark.
Well, thank you, Liberty. It's wonderful to hear your name and to hear your question. Um, I think what's worked best for me as a teacher of adults is starting with things that the adults already know. And most of my students have been teachers or educators of some stripe. And so the power of our students telling stories about their experiences outside the classroom, outside the school, graduate school classroom, is very powerful. Um, Start with their stories, and this both helps to form a constructive community, a learning community, but it also focuses, because of their choice of a story to tell, a story of success or a story of a setback uh, in their work life, helps us to focus on something that is memorable to them and somehow is still important. They're still working it through. And then the question might be, well, how could AI help with, how could it have helped if the situation, if it had been available when you experienced that story? How could it have made things more complicated for you or other actors in the story? Or how could it have made it have a different outcome than the one that you remember, the one you shared with us. So you have a new technology that the students are learning to deal with for the first time, but you're applying it in a context that they're an expert on. So they don't have expertise yet in the use of AI, but they do have expertise in describing a setting that they know better than anybody else in the room. So if you can create that kind of a balance, then you have more, then the learner has more confidence in being able to say, well, I'm on solid ground when I'm imagining my story, the context and the outcomes and what might have been, and I'm a newbie, a new learner when it comes to an application or use of this new technology that I'm just being exposed to for the first time. And that's a much more comfortable setting in which to think clearly as a learner than if all of the expertise and experience are in the person of the teacher, the professor in this case, and none of it is in the experience of the learners. So you wind up with professors like me talking for half an hour about things that my students have never experienced. But if you can flip it in a way that gives each of your students a solid place to stand where they have expertise and I do not, I don't have experience with their context, then it becomes a conversation rather than a monologue. And I'll stop there. I think
Tony,
mic is
you're muted.
muted.
Okay, I'm sorry. I was saying David.
Oh, me. So I do teach adults. I don't do training with adults. So I'll just say a couple of generic things about my thoughts on AI. The first is just a takeaway. I attended a webinar the other day on education and AI, and one of the takeaways that it stuck in with me was someone said if you create an assessment and an AI can take that assessment and pass it, the assessment probably isn't worth giving, which I thought was a great little takeaway. And it sort of goes back to what John and I were sparring about before, that this idea that, information that an AI can glean from its large language models surfing the web or doing whatever it does, I don't claim to understand it, that's information that is going to be on our wrists and on our phones and on our fingertips forever. Another takeaway that I heard about, which perhaps does have more to do with the adult world, is a frustration. And the frustration is that we're seeing a lot of AI implemented in creative ways, creating imagery, creating video, creating text even. And unfortunately, that's a little bit of the flip of what I really want it to do. What I want AI to do is to take care of the boring stuff so that I can spend more time on the creative stuff. But for some reason, it seems to have started focusing. I mean, we're just now beginning to see the beginnings of agents in AI that can take on some of that menial work for us. It's just, so maybe I'll just say it's interesting to me that AI has blown up in so many creative spaces when that's a uniquely human gift that we have to be creative. And I'd kind of like to hold on to that.
Thank you. John?
Yeah, I'll answer a little more generically. And how do you teach anyone anything at all for any reason? And it starts with your learner's motivation. Like, why does this matter to the person? And what might they want to get out of it? And I think Dr. Clark hit on this, is like, if you don't tie your lesson plan to the learner's motivation, they're going to just ignore it. And I think that's what a lot of organizations do, is they pay a lot of money for AI because they're told it will save money and time and salary dollars. And they say, okay, you figure it out. And what ends up happening is people use it to summarize their emails. Um, and it's because AI is such a big topic and such a big concept. Um, People don't know what to do with it. So start with what are your learners' needs are, and what are they motivated to do. Tie that into what do you want them to be able to do when you're done with the lesson, and you start designing your lesson plan. Um, 6 practical practices you can do to make your training better is you start by chunking the information into smaller bits. Instead of teaching AI, find out the smallest unit that you can teach at a time and break your training up into those units. And then you create scaffolding as you organize those units from less complex to more complex so that your new learning builds on your old learning. And that's a common way most of us learn things. Spaced repetition is when you take those lessons, those chunks, and you spread them out over time and you repeat yourself over time. So on week 3, you remind yourself of what you talked about in week 1. Retrieval practice is one of the most effective ways to take information that's started in the brain and move it into long-term memory. And retrieval practice is just having the person's brain practice remembering the information. That can be done with quizzes. It can be done with asking people to write down everything they know about a topic. Is one of the most effective ways if you're trying to learn something, is take a break, don't use any help, and write down everything you know about the topic, and that information will retain in your brain. Interleaving is taking those same chunks and weaving them together. So while you're talking about image generation, you weave into their prompt, how to make good prompts. You're reinforcing what you learned about prompts, that chunk, when you're talking about the image generation chunk. And then desirable difficulty is your challenge that you're trying to give people should be appropriate to their skill level. If the person's never used AI at all, you shouldn't be teaching them advanced prompting techniques. You should teach them, how do you make this summarize your email faster, right? And so those 6 practices, I think I hit them all, are cognitive science-based ways to make your learning more effective, whether it's AI or something totally different.
Wow. Thank you, gentlemen. That was powerful. Thank you,
Hey,
Liberty
Tony,
White, for that question. Yes.
Tony, could I add one thing to what John just said? Is that
Go
okay?
ahead. Yes.
Because you mentioned, John, prompting, which is, it's kind of the new thing now. Everyone needs prompt engineers and how to create the perfect prompt. I recently learned that your first prompt into any AI should always be, help me write the perfect prompt for this. And then you write what was going to be your prompt. Then it will spit out a better prompt, and then you should use that. But the reason that, to me, prompting is so important is because prompting is essentially asking good questions. That's really what prompting is. It's, how can I ask the best question of AI, or anything for that matter, even Google, to get the best answer? And, as a Jew, on Passover, there's a reason we have 4 questions and not 4 answers. Questions are what it's all about. And so if it takes AI and prompting to get educators to focus more on the questions than on the answers, I'm all in.
Wow. Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone, for those responses. Thank you, Liberty, for the question. Liberty has 2 more questions, but we're just going to go to the last one because we're running out of time. And I apologize, Liberty, in advance. So, if you could speak to your younger self, what life advice would you share with them? And we're going to go with Dr. Clark.
My advice, or my message to my younger self would be, you're right, it's going to work out fine. So I've had a blessed life, and it's worked out fine, but I've had moments of doubt about whether it would work out fine. I think a second bit of advice is, plays off David's wonderful response to Liberty about better questions. That is, don't be satisfied with the first question that comes to mind. Um, in fact, I vividly remember talking with a graduate school classmate of mine when we were talking about, well, why are we doing this research in education? Research on teaching was our specialty. Um, what good does it do? Uh, because nobody reads these abstruse reports that we publish in refereed journals. I mean, that's a wonderful professional way of advancing in the field, but no educators really read that stuff. It's other researchers who read it, and they're just trying to one up us. And the answer I came up with was, well, the results of our research are not the important outcomes. We pretend that the results are the gold. That's what's building this edifice of knowledge. But what's the real gold, in my opinion, was then and is now, is better questions. That we do this study, we go through all the trouble of being reliable and valid and spend a lot of government money pursuing the answer to the question we started with. And the real result isn't proving that something is superior or not. The real result is, hey, now that we're here, we're halfway up the mountain. Now things look different and we have a better question to ask. It's better than the one we started with, the one that got us the grant. Now it's a better question. And now we're going to pursue that question, and that's going to lead to better questions. So we share these questions with the field, and that is valuable. That is progress. We're all asking better questions in 2025 than we were able to imagine in 2020 or 1976 when I finished my doctorate. The questions are laughable when I look back at them. So my advice to my young self would be, keep asking better questions. That's the gold, not the results or the awards that we might get.
Okay, John. Thank you, Dr. Clark.
I think I'd probably tell myself, well, life is not going to work out the way you thought. Choose carefully what things to resist, because a lot of that resistance is not worth it. And find out lots of uses for lemons, because you get a lot of them, and lemon is not healthy for you. So figure it out. But it's okay. Like, it's do what you can, not what you can't. And it'll end up being okay.
David?
Those are so great. I think I would give myself three pieces of advice. The first piece of advice I don't really need to give because I did it, but pay attention during typing class. That was by far the best class I ever took. Thank God I took typing, because I can touch type like a crazy person. But the lessons to myself, one would be some of the things that you're learning in school, you really won't ever need or use, but a lot of them you will. So pay attention. And the second lesson I think I would give myself is that failure is fantastic. So get up and try again.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you. Thank you, Liberty, for that. And we're getting down to the very last question. But before I ask the last question, I'm going to ask David if he wanted to just share just a little bit about his school. And maybe we can have a little bit more in-depth conversation in another conversation. But I was excited to hear you talk about starting a new school. And if you could just share just a little bit about that before we get to our last question.
Oh, that's so sweet, Tony. Thank you. Yes. So I run all the educational programs at my temple here in Florida. And so we have currently a pre-K program. We also have an after-school program, lots of other things. But next year, we're starting a micro school, which is inspired by Reggio and Montessori and also Acton Academy, but it really is our own. It's called Sinai Learning Lab. And our mission and vision is really three things. It's curiosity, connection, and courage. We believe that all great learning happens and is born out of curiosity. So the whole point of this program is to allow children to give expression to their curiosity, and then for us to help them push that forward and dig into that. Connection is really two pieces. Number one, we believe that children deserve to know why what they're learning or how what they're learning connects to their own lives. We believe that they deserve that respect. So we want to help them make connections to what they're learning. We also believe that fundamentally, teamwork and collaboration is going to be a fundamental skill. It already is, but even more so in the 21st century. So connection to other people, being able to work together. And finally, courage. We want learning to be really hard. We want it to be really challenging. We want kids to make mistakes all the time. And we want to teach them how to be resilient, how to have grit, how to get up and iterate on ideas and try new things. So that's really what this whole program is about. I'm really excited about it. We have 24 spots that we're opening in our K-2 learning community. And then after that, we'll be opening a 3rd through 5th grade learning community. They are going to be very small by design. And we already have 10 kids enrolled and about 10 more on a list who are applying. So it's exciting. It's good stuff.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I
Thank
hope
you.
that we can have an additional conversation about that school
I have so much to
and
say,
everything
Tony.
that you're doing.
I'm so excited about it.
Fantastic. The last question for us all this evening is, you're speaking to the world. What do you want the world to know? And we're going to go to Dr. Clark first.
I'm a hard act to follow here. What I want the world to know, and especially educators and my fellow panelists here, is that you may have noticed that there's never time to finish everything, but there's always time to get something started. And I'll stop right there.
Thank you. David?
What do I want the world to know? Oh, I know what I want the world to know. There is always more to know. There's always more to learn. You know what I learned? I went to so much school. I went to college, 5 years of rabbinical school. You know what I learned? How much I don't know. So go out and learn something. Watch a YouTube video. Ask AI. Do whatever. Go out and learn something. Always more to learn.
John?
Get off of social media and stop watching 24/7 news. You'll be happier.
And I want to thank you all so much for being here with me. And I just want to say to the listeners and everybody watching, just be encouraged. Just be encouraged. No matter how things seem, be encouraged. Be encouraged. So I want to thank my guests for being with me today. You can watch Conversation with Tony Mobley on YouTube, the YouTube channel for Conversation with Tony Mobley, my website. And if you go to YouTube, we ask that you go there, like, and subscribe. Conversation with Tony Mobley is produced by Value Audio Visual Professionals who meet daily in Office Hours Global, hosted by Alex Lindsay. And we want to say thank you, Mimo Live, for this production on everything that you see, the lower thirds and all the magic. That is courtesy of Mimo Live. We have conversations with real people. We ask that you stay tuned for new episodes and great conversations on Conversations with Tony Mobley. And we have over 100+ episodes. And we ask that if you have time, go back and look at some of those past episodes. And you might find something that you like, and it might be helpful to you. I want to say thank you to my guests for being a part of this conversation today, for doing the work that you do, and for being the person who you are. And we ask that you stay tuned for future conversations with Tony Mobley. We want to say Good night. God bless. And again, if you have an opportunity and you like what you see, like and subscribe on YouTube. We want to grow our subscribers. So again, God bless you. Good night. Take care. Thank you again, guests. See you soon. Bye-bye, everyone.